Hello, welcome to lecture 7 of our series on pre-global Buddhism. Happy to have you here today. I'm going to first talk again a little bit about geopolitical issues, and then go into some Buddhist philosophy, which I will then continue in the next lecture. One of the things that we are trying to deal with is the role of the geopolitical issues at the time of the Buddha and in the centuries following, and whether those had a role to play in how Buddhism developed. Of course, the big issue was that Eurasia had two great empires, the Roman Empire to the west and the Han Empire to the east. The Roman Empire controlled all of the main entryways to the Mediterranean. And in certain times of the year, they would travel from the Mediterranean by sea, open sea, to Great Britain. But as we know from the ancient books, the Roman Empire rose and the Roman Empire fell or declined. One of the issues that the Roman Empire faced was the fact that across the steppe regions, stretching across from Eurasia, were nomadic peoples who were constantly invading and who were very destructive. And at one time actually did send troops to Rome itself, demanding tribute. So among other things, the Romans gave them 3,000 pounds of black pepper from India. So we know that even at the time, in the 4th century, the contact is still in place between Rome and Asia. Now, as I mentioned, the Roman Empire came to an end, and this was to have a lot of ramifications, I think, for Buddhism. The Roman Empire is said to have ended in 476. The barbarians finally made it into the peninsula, and the Roman government collapsed. But even prior to that, the eastern portion, which covered the whole of the Mediterranean, the access to the Red Sea, the trade routes to Asia, had already formed a separate kingdom from the Western Empire. Rome was declining, Rome was falling. After Rome fell, then there was enormous changes. In India, one of the biggest changes was the rise of the Gupta Empire. It didn't always cover all of India, but it very soon covered the major ancient homeland of Buddhism. And the Gupta Empire was, I think, able to rise, and by the time it arose, the two great empires of the Han and Rome were gone. So there was a kind of vacuum. And into this vacuum came new empires. Among them, this Gupta Empire, which had enormous impact on Buddhism. It is, I think, the time when the Buddhist and Brahmanic tradition was still very close together. And so we see that the geopolitical issues were still with us. The Gupta Empire was a time of enormous development and achievements. There's no question about it. Particularly in the world of mathematics, the idea of zero, the discovery of pi that we all use in our algebra and our mathematics, developments in medicine. It was a time when there was a flourishing of culture. And during this time, our question is, what happened to Buddhism? The Gupta Empire maintained all of its trading routes to the Mediterranean, although the market had changed considerably. There was not the great wealth that the Roman Empire had been able to accumulate. Because of that, the trade in India shifted to the east. And the development of Buddhism also shifted to the east. And that's when the maritime Buddhism became so important. So we've seen these geopolitical issues before. We see that they were happening and Buddhism was part of it. Now I'm going to take you into a completely different realm. What was happening to Buddhist thought during all of this? And the two seem so remotely situated that you think there's almost no geopolitical connection between what the philosophers were doing. And we'll talk about this and we'll discuss it. But let's go to philosophy. Without question, in Buddhism, Nagarjuna, probably 2nd century of the Common Era, brought to Buddhism a philosophical position which would dominate it. And he was called the second Buddha by many people. We're not quite sure about his life. As I've told you before, when you're this many years away from somebody, all the lore, all the stories, all the ideas of what they were like and what they did, it's usually just speculation, and we don't quite know what to do with it. However, one of the things that had happened, as I've mentioned before, is that Buddhism had adopted writing. This new technology, which had come to them through the Persians, through the Achaemenid Empire. And so we have, for the first time in Buddhism, which had been an oral tradition, the oral tradition is being replaced by written documents. When the oral tradition gets replaced by written documents, what you have is the development of treatises, commentaries, if you will, and the fact that we can actually have probably a pretty accurate picture of what Nagarjuna felt and thought in terms of his philosophy, because we still have received documents that have been handed down, even though in many cases they've been changed or interpreted. But we have a pretty good idea of what this person thought. Now, I recommend to all of you that you try to acquaint yourselves with some of the texts that I'm going to show you. Nagarjuna wrote in verses. Now, normally we think if you're writing in verse, it's for an oral tradition. Orality is best expressed in such verse because the verses allow you to maintain a metric. And the metric means that you can memorize words in the right order because you know what the meter is. And if the metric is off, you know that there's something wrong with the words that you're using, or at least the order they're in. So Nagarjuna's works are like jet lag. They're all metric. But nevertheless, they carry new ideas, new thoughts. And what he did in many ways was to set the pace for what would dominate the Buddhist conversations for centuries. Nagarjuna was known for the fact that he stated that there is no position which you can hold, no concept which you can argue about that can be defended. In other words, all positions, no matter what they are, can be refuted. And so some people said, well, Nagarjuna was a nihilist. If you can't hold on to anything. So his method of teaching was to say, neti, neti, not this, not that. So it would be like having an argument in which you are putting forth what you wish to put forth with somebody. And every time you put forward a new position, they say, no, not that. There are stories of professors who do this. Every time a student comes and says, isn't this the case? No, not quite. Read more. So Nagarjuna was known for this. Madhyamika means the middle way. So what's the middle way? Many people say, what's the middle in terms of Nagarjuna? Because he was saying, it's neither this nor that. And so they say, well, it must be the middle. But if you said to him, there is a middle, he would say, no, there is no middle. It's neither this nor that, but it's also not anything that's in between. Aryadeva was the next name that we can identify. And he also wrote in verse. And he talked about the four possibilities. A thing exists, it doesn't exist, it both can exist and not exist, and it neither exists nor does not exist. The four elements. Again, it's following what Nagarjuna was saying. There is nothing that you can hold on to. Every time you say it, neti, neti, not that, not this. Now, some people feel that this is very close to what developed in Greece among the people who were called the skeptics. skeptics were investigators. A skeptic was somebody who really investigated everything, took nothing for granted, would not accept or receive a statement until they investigated it. So people feel that these Buddhists were skeptics. Now, it's said that when Alexander the Great came to the gates of India, he met a seer who taught that nothing can be held onto, and that one of the people in Alexander's troop got the idea of skepticism from him. Controversial. I can't guarantee that this was true, but it's an interesting story. What was happening in India from a philosophical point of view? Remember, this is not a geopolitical way of looking, but a philosophical view, is that there was a succession of teachers who built upon the work of their predecessor. And so Nagarjuna in the 2nd century was followed by Aryadeva. And then came a very important person who has been almost totally neglected in recent scholarship, Buddhapalita, late 50, early 6th century. His commentary to Nagarjuna, the Madhyamaka Vritti, is the oldest extant commentary that we have to Nagarjuna's work. And that's really important because it allows us to reconstruct Nagarjuna's work from the commentary if we wish. Buddhapalita also wrote another verse, the Akuta Bhava Aya, which was to fear nothing. He firmly believed in the idea that there was no position that could be maintained. There was nothing which didn't, on analysis, crumble. And he was looked down upon by later people in a way because this idea was seen as nihilism, and people were not happy. They felt that he took Nagarjuna, and by interpreting Nagarjuna's way of going through and arguing from a negative, was not something that Buddhism needed in terms of ethics and morals and understanding from the general public. So he got ignored in a way by being viewed as somebody who was just totally on the negative side of things. So along comes Baba Viveka, 6th century. And Baba Viveka is what people have been waiting for. Somebody who will put forward a position that says, it's not all negative. You don't have to live just with the negative. You can have arguments which are, as he called them, svatantrika. Now, Baba Viveka, when he was talking about what's posited in what he says, he says that Baba Viveka says that if you can look at what is held by a particular school, that you can have a foundation for an idea which does survive the dialectic of a philosopher. Now, all of the understanding that we have about Baba Viveka in many ways comes from the old Tibetan commentaries. They saw Buddhism as having two very distinct schools. Baba Viveka belonged to the one which taught that you could have a kind of self-affirming reality, the Svatantrika. And that there was the other school which said, no, you can't have any position which holds. It can all be negated. But as somebody has recently pointed out, one of the problems with this is that Nagarjuna said, the minute you say there's a school of thought, you can put thought into a position where it's lasting, it's positive. But from Nagarjuna's point of view, it seems that Buddhapalita was correct. He would never have said, there is a school of Svatantrika, there is a school of prasanga. That is, there is a school of a self-reference. There is a school of negativity. And that once you think there is a school, then you've already violated Nagarjuna's ideas. Because now you have schools of Buddhism. And there are things to be accepted and things that are seen to be real, to have their own essential nature. So that's the big battle which began to rage. With Baba Viveka's work, it's very interesting. He refers us to a whole list of schools that are developed by his time. Yogacara for Buddhism, the Sankhya school, the Vaisheshikas, the Vedanta, the Mimamsa. These are all mentioned by him. In other words, in philosophical terms, India and Indian thought is being promulgated by a series of schools of thought. And so one studies or becomes associated with a particular school, a particular way of looking at reality. And that's what all the schools are. If you take it down to its most basic thing, the most basic issue is, what is real? What is reality? And each of the schools address it in a particular way. So I think in your research, as you begin to try to deal with these issues, you might make yourself a notebook on reality and start reading in the schools to see, how did the Vedanta treat reality? Was reality, if I have an idea, is that real? If I have a mental state, is that real? Does it have to be made up of the four elements, earth, water, fire, before it's real? Is a word real? Is the sound real? All of these were major issues for the whole of India, and the Buddhists had their own position. The Yogacara school would become very dominant, and we're going to see it transported all the way to China and East Asia. The Yogacara, which says that everything is created and focused in the mental process. And there is, I think, in the Yogacara school, a feeling that the mental process has a reality. Well, in the 7th century, this line of reasoning reached another great master, Chandrakirti. Chandrakirti in the 7th century is still writing commentaries on Nagarjuna. His Prasanapada is a commentary to the Madhyamaka Virti, to the text of, so it's like a sub-commentary of a commentary of Nagarjuna. Chandrakirti wanted to follow Nagarjuna. He felt that to follow him, it could not be the Yogacara method. It had to be a pure negative approach, so that the issues were very strong for Chandrakirti. A lot of people saw him as returning to a very old position, which many felt had been replaced by Baba Viveka. The Tibetans identified Chandrakirti as a prasangika, somebody who believes in the negative. But they also said that because there is the idea that not this, not this, not this, it allows for the idea of a position in which things have no reality if they are tied to anything else. Those things that arise of themselves would have a reality. So we know, for example, the big issue about perception. Is what we perceive, is our perception of the thing really the thing? And the answer is no, it's not really the thing. I see fire, but I don't have fire in my brain. I don't have the characteristics of fire. I can see it, I can feel it, but I don't have it. But what do I have? I have the idea, I have the concept, I have the notion. So the issues which came up at this point was, yes, we perceive. What is it we perceive? Our perception may be distorted and wrong, but isn't it true that there's something out there which we perceive? So what the Buddhist position was trying to establish is that they were searching for, is there something which exists that is not affected by something else, by what we think or what we believe. That is there a quantum level of reality which is something which is not affected by me, and yet it's there? And we cannot find a cause. We cannot find anything which makes it the way it is. It just is itself. That's what they mean by a kind of self-affirming or the thatness or thusness. It just is. And so you can see why when people said, of course, your perception will never give you the thing. Of course, your thought will never give it to you. Of course, logical reasoning will never give it all to you. All of those things are based on the ideas where you have something that is dependent on something else for its existence. That being so, there can be no essential thusness for that thing. We remove it from thusness. We make it into a conventional truth. So the Buddhists had to have two levels of reality. They had to have a conventional one because we do live in the conventional world, and our perceptions allow us to live in this world. And as remote as they may be from the thing itself, nevertheless, they are effective. We do live, and we don't get run over by a bus, and we drive cars, and we do things. So we live in the conventional. But yet there was always this thought, there is something beyond the conventional, something which is not affected by what we think or do. No matter what we think, we can't change the quantum. It's beyond our ability to change it. It has never been dependent on our thinking. We can discover it, we can spot it, we can describe it, but it never was dependent upon us. However, the idea of quantum is our imagination. The quantum is something that we have invented to describe the indescribable. So from Nagarjuna's point of view, the quantum itself is always going to be negated. Whereas whatever the quantum is reflecting, or whatever it is that we are trying to get to, which is beyond our thought, beyond our experience, in the sense of knowing. So this is what was happening. Rome is falling. The Han Dynasty is falling. New empires are rising. Old markets and trade are declining. And so what happens is, for the Buddhist, as well as India, they're turning their attention totally to themselves and to the eastern shores, to the Bay of Bengal, and from there to Southeast Asia and to China. And the power of the world market shifted to Asia. There was much more wealth in Asia than there was in the Mediterranean for a long period of time. And so the Buddhist thinkers were living in this environment. And the question is, which I can't answer for you, you have to think what you want to do with it. The Buddhists are dealing with this world. So the question is, for you, Svatantra, is there something that is not dependent on my thinking, not made by my thought, something which I can never change, I can never manipulate, because it is its own thing, not dependent on anything else? It was a very complicated issue. I can guarantee you that the arguments that were put forward are quite difficult to comprehend, difficult to refute, difficult to accept, difficult to prove. What a fantastically complex system of Buddhism developed at this time of great shifts of geopolitical issues. And the growth of the strength of Asia, the amount of wealth which was being generated in Asia, I think allowed Buddhism to become a powerful tool of thought, and a critical mass could be supported to think about these issues in the most minute details. So what is the history of Buddhism? Is it geopolitical? Is it history? Is it trade and commerce? Is it sitting alone in a monastery? Is it the product of our meditation? It's what makes Buddhism such an interesting topic. Thank you very much.